Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today. It's one of a pair of tags that were done over at Stripcover Lit. Adrian, a little while ago, did a tag of where you're supposed to haul out opening paragraphs that you really like. They're called popcorn tags, I think, because of something that you kids understand that I don't. I don't know what a popcorn tag is. But just recently, just yesterday, Dalton did a complimentary tag for great closing paragraphs. Opening paragraphs was a little tougher for me. I still want to do it. But closing paragraphs, there's an art to a closing paragraph. There's an art to getting it right, because that's just the worst of all times, right? I mean, you're at the end of your book. You're in therapy. You're in hock. You're in divorce court. You're in rehab. If you can pull out a great paragraph at the end of such a time, more power to you. And I have a bunch of examples that I want to share with you. Adrian's tag for opening paragraphs looked like it was supposed to be just 3. But Dalton did a whole bunch of closing paragraphs, and I want to do them too. And I have a few of these here if you've been watching all of my videos, which I don't think there's anybody. Is there anybody out there that has watched all of my videos? Even if you have, you wouldn't remember them all. Surely you haven't remembered them all. We're closing in on 2,000 videos. So I can assume, I think, we're closing in on 2,000 videos, and we're closing in on 6,000 subscribers. So I have to assume that a large number of people who watch this channel do not remember, have never seen videos from 2 years ago, and are new to the channel. So some of the reason I preface that is because some of these are old favorites. Some of these are so good that I have read them. I'll read them at the drop of a hat, and I've read them before in other contexts on this channel. I'm going to read them again unabashedly. But I've got a bunch of others too that I want to read to you. So we'll do this first one. We have all missed that trivial, emphatic presence. By no means a domestic creature, neither was he simply a penned wild one. Wild and tame, he showed some of the best of both. He lived less than a year and a half. We take the shortness as a rebuke of some kind, but count that odd visit as a minor privilege, an emblem of the household. And that is from William Service's book, Owl, in which the author and his family take in a little owl, and he bosses them around. The owl bosses them around for 150 wonderful, glorious pages. And that's how it ends. Where we are reminded again that presence was always emphatic, an exclamation point on the kitchen table. I just love that. Then we'll do this next one. I won't say that this is only for Wilson Shugart, but nevertheless, let's see here. Standing beside that moonlit grave, one looks back. All the violence of the pre-war world has vanished, and in its place there glow, year into backward year, the diminishing vistas of that other England, the England where the Grantchester church clock stood at 10 to 3, where there was beauty and certainty and quiet, all with capital letters, and where nothing was real. Today we know it for what it was, but there were moments, very human moments, when you could almost find it in our hearts to envy those who saw it and who never lived to see the new world. And that is a great book, George Dangerfield, The Strange Death of Liberal England. My copy is ready to fall apart. This is quotable on every page, quotable in every paragraph. This is a brilliant, brilliant look at the horrible breech birth of modern England. And it's one of those weird, odd works of English history that everyone should read, and that I really wish I could find this in an attractive, durable paperback. I wish that, for instance, that Penguin Classic, my beloved Penguin Classic, I wish that they would reprint it. Enough time has passed now that people know this is a classic of its kind. It's not the kind of classic you would go to, for a quarry to research something new. It's a classic instead of historical eloquence. It's a classic of history writing, in the way that Macaulay is, or Gibbon, and deserves immortality the way those things have, and it hasn't had it so far. so I hold on to whatever copies I can find. Then we'll do this next one. All of these I have mentioned on this channel before, one way or another, but I can't help myself. Things will never be the same. I have a young brown skulking dog training down in Texas, however, and a sneaky little creeping, pointing dog, a new, strange, brown, big dog, who still continues to stop at the strangest times and freeze and stare up at the sky so intently as to perhaps cause even time to pause for a moment, just for a moment, to admire all the beauty below, including that big, muscular brown dog on point, before moving on. It's the strangest thing. Even after burying his bones, I have the feeling every day that I'm going to see him again. I'm going to hunt with him again, at least once more. And this is Rick Bass. This is his great book, Coulter, about a hunting dog that he fell in love with. And one of the best dog books that I have ever read. Perhaps the best, certainly the most eloquent and the most touching. And that's coming from yours truly, who is the world's biggest fan of dogs, but no fan of hunting. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. With a book like this, it doesn't matter at all. And that last moment, it will be familiar to those of you who've had that one special dog, that special kind of dog. They're all special. Of course, you love them all, and you give them anything, and you see them through from beginning to end. But there's a handful in that parade that are different, that go deeper. There's no fault of the ones that don't. And it's never any intent of the ones who do. And it's not your fault for feeling that. It's not wrong to feel that. It's just that some of them do get you that way. And when they do, you have that reaction. You still feel like you're going to see them again every day. I love that that's captured. Then we'll do this next one. Something near and dear to the hearts of all of us who are on BookTube. Literary experience heals the wound without undermining the privilege of individuality. There are mass emotions which heal the wound, but they destroy the privilege. In them, our separate selves are pooled, and we sink back into sub-individuality. But in reading great literature, I become 1,000 men, and yet remain myself. Like the night sky in the Greek poem, I see with a myriad eyes, but it is still I who see. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself, and am never more myself than when I do. And that is from a great book that isn't well enough known, An Experiment in Criticism by C.S. Lewis. This is all about reading. I mention it, I paraphrase from this book in my very first BookTube video. And I could endlessly paraphrase from it forever, because this is one of the best little books on reading that I've ever read. Just a full bore of eloquence. Something, I have huge paragraphs underlined throughout this thing of just the greatest. I wonder if I could read you another one. Well, no, I'm supposed to only read last paragraphs. I'll have to do a whole video on C.S. Lewis at some point or other. But boy, oh boy, I don't even know if you can find this book anymore. It might be in a big collected C.S. Lewis, but I highly recommend it. You don't have to care about his religious views or his, in my opinion, hysterically overpraised fantasy series. You don't have to care about anything. You don't have to care who this author is to love this book on reading. Then we'll get another one. This one is also going to be bookish and about reading, but in a different way and very touching way. Let's see here. I realized that this entire time, learning about the library, I had been convincing myself that my hope to tell a long-lasting story, to create something that endured, to be alive somehow as long as someone would read my books, was what drove me on, story after story. It was my lifeline, my passion, my way to understand who I was. I thought about my mother, who died when I was halfway done with this book. And I knew how pleased she would have been to see me in the library, and I was able to use that thought to transport myself for a split second to a time when I was young, and she was in the moment, alert and tender, with years ahead of her. And she was beaming at me as I toddled to the checkout counter with an armload of books. I knew that if we had come here together to this enchanted place of stucco and statuary and all the stories in the world for us to have, she would have reminded me just how about now that if she could have chosen any profession in the world, she would have been a librarian. I looked around the room at the few people scattered here and there. Some were leaning into books, and a few were just resting, having a private moment in a public space. And I felt buoyed by being here. This is why I wanted to write this book. To tell about a place I love that doesn't belong to me but feels like it is mine, and how that feels marvelous and exceptional. All the things that are wrong in the world seem conquered by a library's simple, unspoken promise. Here I am, please tell me your story. Here is my story, please listen. And that is from Susan Orlean's book, The Library Book. Just new, incredible, an amazing book. On one level, about a fire in a library in Los Angeles, but and the digging around to find out who was responsible for that fire and why, and whether or not the police investigation at the time might have been wrong. But on every other level, and eventually subsuming the whole book is this is about libraries and reading and the love of both. If your life has ever been touched by a library, you have to read this book. I am a big fan of hers. I have liked all of her other books, but this is the first book she's written that crosses over, takes that step up into a book that you must read, even if you don't know who she is. If your life has been touched by a library or by reading, you have to read this book. And then we'll get to a couple of old favorites, and I'll stop. This one is an ending, a final paragraph that I have read many times, but I'm going to read it again because I can. So, when he finished, he handed the quill to his assistant. He could see the boy's features clearly now, could see everything clearly, his whole soul in his eyes. Another line out of some old poem, he thought sadly, and then, ironically, more sadly yet, farewell my book and my devotion. Then, in panic, he realized, but only for an instant, that he was dead, falling violently towards Christ. That's John Gardner's Life of Geoffrey Chaucer. Not, again, a quarry where anyone would go scholarly-wise, but a great, brilliant, wonderful book. It received a point-by-point and very exhaustive drubbing from another critic I really love, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and critics know that. They know the book will have the final word. They can't do anything, really, one way or another, except nitpick. Although Gardner's Life of Chaucer is, I believe, out of print and will probably stay out of print unless it gets in the Library of America, I guarantee you, if you find this book and start reading it, you're not going to care about what that critic or any other critic has to say. You're going to care about what you just heard. Just blindingly brilliant from start to finish. Just wonderful. Falling violently towards Christ. And then we'll finish up. We'll finish up with my last one. I have mentioned this many, many times, and I am not going to read just one paragraph. I'm going to read an ending. But I've read it many times before. Those, again, I don't know how many of you have been watching all along. You're going to have to expect some repetition. That's part of being a reader anyway. And especially in a tag that calls for favorites. So I'm not going to read just the final paragraph. I'm going to read this is the conclusion of this book. It's not long. The day is done. The supper things have all been washed and put away. The kerosene lamp on the dining table gives off a soft yellow glow that highlights the geese on the walls and leaves deep shadows in the corners. In the fireplace, an old oak fire is quietly burning, which, together with the lamp, radiates enough heat to keep the low-ceilinged living room reasonably warm. We sit by the fire and talk tonight about nothing very serious. We feel comfortably tired after our exertions of the day, comfortably fed, and comfortably warm. The mantel clock ticks quietly on and suddenly strikes 10 in its characteristically erratic way. First one person, then another yawns, stretches, departs for bed, until at last only the old man himself is left. Finally, even he gets up from his chair, takes his last weather observation, checks up on the kitchen stove, and puts out the lamps. Being the last to go, he can enjoy the luxury of leisurely undressing before the fire, for the warmth of the dying fire. By slowly turning around and around, he thoroughly toasts himself. At last, however, he can procrastinate no longer. He puts up the fire screen, dashes rapidly into his bedroom, and takes the desperate plunge between ice-cold sheets. Through the open living room door, he can see dancing lights and shadows, and hear quiet sounds as the fire burns down. From the pantry comes a barely audible scratching, indicating that the pantry mouse is busily engaged in finding himself some supper. Outside, there is a slight rustling as the light breeze stirs the cedars, while the sudden barking of a dog suggests that Mr. Fox is bothering someone's chickens. Rest now, little farmhouse. Your flock is safely in bed and sound asleep. Thank you for the wonderfully good times you have given us. Good night. And that's from Wyman Richardson's book, The House on Nauset Marsh. A book, as you can tell from the mention of kerosene and Mr. Fox and chickens and whatnot. This is a series of vignettes about a Cape Cod that is gone. Used to exist, unweatherized houses, no McMansions, no electricity, no nothing. just a wonderful, wonderful, pure place. And he captures it perfectly in these essays. They originally appeared in a magazine, and people loved them, and then he made them into a book, and the book became successful and was reprinted 1 million times, and I think you can still get it. I see it all the time, of course, in New England, and when I used to spend time on the Cape, I would see it everywhere in the used bookstores there. But you might think you need to know the Cape in order to read this, and you don't. You don't. I'm hoping that conclusion showed you that. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is be prepared to be in the presence of a wonderfully warm storyteller from the very beginning to that wonderful ending. That wonderful ending that I always think of. I don't think of it. It's not a concluding paragraph, but I'm going to get away with it. So there you go. That is the concluding paragraphs tag. And I want to tag a bunch of people. I'll do that in the information down below. Because I think I've exhausted your patience enough as it is. I've read some of those things many times, but I can't help it. They're so good. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.